At the restaurant, my girlfriend flirted with the waiter right in front of me. When I confronted her, she rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, relax, I'm just being friendly. Don't be so insecure, it's not attractive." When we left, she said she forgot something and went back inside. I saw her getting the waiter's number through the window. I pretended like nothing happened. The next morning, she woke up to an empty bed and empty apartment. The only thing left was a note next to a picture of me holding an engagement ring, saying, "Guess you found someone more attractive than your insecure boyfriend." Now she's blowing up my phone, sobbing, "I was just joking around. Please come back, I love you." You know that feeling when your whole world just crumbles in a matter of seconds? Yeah, that was me 3 months ago, sitting in what I thought was going to be the most important dinner of my life. I had the ring hidden in my jacket pocket, my heart pounding like a drum, and my girlfriend Sarah sitting across from me looking absolutely stunning in that little black dress I'd bought her for her birthday. But let me tell you something, life has a twisted sense of humor, and sometimes the universe decides to show you exactly who someone really is right when you're about to make the biggest mistake of your life. We'd been together for 2 years. 2 whole years of what I thought was pure happiness. Sarah was everything I'd ever wanted, beautiful, funny, smart, and she had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the world when she looked at me. At least, that's what I thought until that night at Romano's, this fancy Italian place downtown that I'd been saving up for months to afford. I'd planned everything perfectly. The reservation at 8, the corner table with the perfect lighting, even coordinated with the staff to have champagne ready for after I popped the question. The ring? Man, I'd been making payments on that thing for 6 months. It was a beautiful solitaire diamond, exactly what she'd pointed out in the jewelry store window we'd passed a dozen times. So there we were, looking at the menus, and I'm trying to work up the courage to get down on one knee when our waiter approaches. This guy was probably in his mid-20s, had that whole tall, dark, and handsome thing going on, and honestly, I didn't think much of it at first. Just another good-looking waiter in a fancy restaurant, right? "Good evening, folks. I'm Marco, and I'll be taking care of you tonight," he said with this charming smile that I swear made half the women in the restaurant turn their heads. But here's where things got interesting. Instead of just ordering like a normal person, Sarah suddenly transforms into someone I'd never seen before. She's batting her eyelashes, playing with her hair, and giving this guy the kind of smile she used to reserve just for me. "Oh, Marco," she says, and I swear she's practically purring his name. "What would you recommend for someone with sophisticated tastes?" Now, I'm sitting there thinking maybe I'm just being paranoid. Maybe she's just being friendly, right? But then she leans forward, giving him a perfect view down her dress, and asks, "Do you have anything that's really special tonight?" The way she said special, with this little breathy tone, made my stomach drop. This wasn't friendly. This was straight up flirting, and she was doing it right in front of me like I wasn't even there. Marco, to his credit, kept things professional while clearly enjoying the attention. He recommended a few dishes, and Sarah hung on his every word like he was reciting poetry instead of describing pasta. When he left to get our drinks, I thought maybe that was it. But oh no, it was just the beginning. Every time Marco came to our table, Sarah would find some excuse to touch his arm, laugh at things that weren't even funny, and ask him personal questions about his life. She wanted to know where he was from, what he did besides waiting tables, if he had a girlfriend. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there like a piece of furniture, watching the woman I was about to propose to openly flirt with another man. Have you ever been in a situation where you can feel your heart breaking in real time? That's exactly what was happening to me. Each giggle, each hair flip, each "Oh Marco, you're so funny," was like a knife twisting in my chest. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. When Marco walked away after Sarah had asked him for the 3rd time if he needed any help carrying the plates, seriously, who offers to help a waiter? I leaned across the table. "Sarah," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and steady. "What are you doing?" She looked at me with this innocent expression that I now know was completely fake. "What do you mean?" "You're flirting with a waiter. Right in front of me." The mask slipped for just a second, and I saw something cold flash in her eyes before she rolled them dramatically. "Oh relax, I'm just being friendly. Don't be so insecure, it's not attractive." Those words hit me like a physical blow. Insecure? Not attractive? I was insecure because I didn't want to watch my girlfriend of 2 years hit on another man during what was supposed to be our special night? But here's the thing, I've never been good at confrontation. I've always been more of a keep the peace kind of guy. So instead of making a scene, I just sat there, finished my overpriced pasta, and tried to pretend like my heart wasn't shattered into a million pieces. The ring in my pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. We made small talk for the rest of the dinner, but the magic was completely gone. Sarah kept glancing over at Marco whenever he walked by, and I kept wondering how I'd been so blind to who she really was. When the check came, I paid it without complaint, even though the whole evening had cost me nearly $300. As we were getting ready to leave, Sarah suddenly stopped by the door. "Oh shoot, I think I forgot my earring at the table. Give me just 1 second?" I should have known. I should have seen it coming. But I was still in shock from everything that had happened, so I just nodded and said I'd wait for her outside. That's when I made the decision that changed everything. Instead of walking to the car like I usually would, something made me turn around and look back through the restaurant window. And there she was, my girlfriend of 2 years, the woman I'd been about to propose to, standing at the bar with Marco. She was writing something down on a napkin, and when she handed it to him, he smiled and tucked it into his shirt pocket. She was giving him her number. Right there, not even 5 minutes after calling me insecure and unattractive. I stood there frozen, watching this woman I thought I knew completely destroy what we had built together. When she finally came out, she had this little satisfied smile on her face, like she'd just won some kind of prize. "Find your earring?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Oh, yeah, it was right under the table." Silly me. She linked her arm through mine like nothing had happened. "Ready to go home?" Have you ever had to pretend everything was fine when your entire world was falling apart? That car ride home was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Sarah chattered away about how great the food was, how handsome Marco was, she actually said that, and how we should definitely go back there soon. I just drove and nodded and made appropriate sounds at the right times while my brain was working overtime. She had no idea that I'd seen what she'd done. She thought she'd gotten away with it completely. When we got back to my apartment, she was all over me, probably feeling guilty about what she'd done. She wanted to watch a movie, cuddle on the couch, do all the things we normally did on date nights. But I couldn't stomach it. I couldn't stand the thought of her touching me after what I'd witnessed. "I'm pretty tired," I told her. "Long day tomorrow. Maybe we should just get some sleep." She pouted a little but agreed. We went through our usual nighttime routine. She borrowed one of my t-shirts, brushed her teeth with the toothbrush she kept at my place, and climbed into bed next to me. I lay there in the dark, listening to her breathing, and made a decision that would change both our lives forever. See, here's what Sarah didn't know about me: I'm a planner. I think things through. I don't just react, I calculate. And as I lay there staring at the ceiling, I realized that this wasn't just about her flirting with Marco. This was about respect, about trust, about the fact that the woman I loved had looked me in the eye and called me insecure for having a completely reasonable reaction to her inappropriate behavior. But more than that, it was about the fact that she'd lied to me. She'd made up that story about the earring, snuck around behind my back, and then come home and acted like nothing had happened. If she could do that so easily, what else had she been lying about? I waited until she was deep asleep, then carefully got out of bed and went to my home office. I had work to do. First things first, I needed to figure out exactly what I was dealing with. I grabbed Sarah's phone, she always left it charging on the kitchen counter, and, using the passcode I'd seen her type in 100 times, I started digging. What I found made my blood run cold. The conversation with Marco wasn't her first rodeo. There were text threads with at least 4 other guys, all following the same pattern. Flirty messages, plans to meet up, complaints about her boring boyfriend who didn't appreciate her. Some of these conversations went back months. One particularly painful thread was with a guy named Jake from her gym. They'd been messaging for 3 weeks, and from what I could see, they'd already met up twice. The messages were explicit, detailed. They left no doubt about what had been happening. Another thread was with her coworker David. Apparently, those late nights at the office weren't quite as work-focused as she'd led me to believe. But the one that really got to me was a group chat with her girlfriends. They were all talking about their relationships, and Sarah's contributions were brutal. "Honestly, I don't know why I stay with him," she'd written just last week. "He's so predictable and boring. Always wants to stay home and watch movies. Zero ambition. I could do so much better." Her friend Lisa had responded, "Then why don't you just break up with him?" Sarah's reply: "Because he pays for everything lol. Free dinners, free rent basically since I'm always at his place, and he's probably going to propose soon. Might as well get a nice ring out of it before I upgrade." Do you know what it feels like to read something like that about yourself? To realize that the person you love sees you as nothing more than a meal ticket and a stepping stone to something better? I sat there in my office chair, staring at that message, and felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, but it was being rapidly replaced by something else. Something cold and calculating. Sarah wanted to play games? Fine. But she was about to learn that she'd picked the wrong person to play with. I spent the next 3 hours planning. I made lists, I researched, I prepared. By the time the sun started coming up, I had a plan that would give Sarah exactly what she deserved. The first step was the easiest. I went online and canceled the ring. Since I'd been making payments, I was able to get most of my money back. That felt good, like taking back a piece of myself that she'd never deserved. Next, I started gathering evidence. I took screenshots of all the conversations, saved them in a folder on my computer, and backed them up to the cloud. I documented everything, the dates, the messages, the lies. I wanted to make sure I had a complete record of exactly who Sarah really was. Then came the hard part, I had to act normal. When Sarah woke up around 9, I was in the kitchen making coffee like nothing had happened. I kissed her good morning, asked about her plans for the day, and listened to her lie about having to work late again that evening. That's fine, I told her. I've got some stuff to take care of today anyway. She looked relieved, probably thinking about her plans with one of her side guys. Little did she know that I was about to turn her world upside down. After she left for work, I got started on phase 2 of my plan. I called my landlord and explained that I needed to break my lease early due to a job relocation. He wasn't happy about it, but I offered to pay an extra month's rent as a penalty, and he agreed to let me out by the end of the week. Then I called a moving company and scheduled them to pack up everything the next day while Sarah was at work. I arranged for my stuff to be put in storage temporarily while I figured out my next move. But here's where it gets really interesting, I didn't just disappear. Oh no, that would have been too easy for her. I wanted Sarah to understand exactly what she'd lost and why. I spent the afternoon at the jewelry store where I'd been making payments on the engagement ring. The sales associate, Mrs. Chen, remembered me and was surprised when I explained that I wouldn't be needing the ring after all. "I'm sorry to hear that, dear," she said kindly. "These things happen sometimes." "Actually," I said, pulling out my phone and showing her one of the screenshots, "I was wondering if you could help me with something else." I explained my situation, not in detail, but enough for her to understand what had happened. Mrs. Chen listened with growing horror as I told her about Sarah's behavior and the messages I'd found. "That's terrible," she said. "What can I do to help?" That's when I showed her the picture Sarah had sent to the group chat, the one where she'd bragged about getting a nice ring out of me before she upgraded. Mrs. Chen's face went pale. "I want to send her a message," I explained. "Something that will make it very clear what she's lost." Mrs. Chen thought about it for a moment, then smiled. "I think I know exactly what you need." We worked together to create the perfect photograph, me holding the engagement ring I'd been planning to give her, the one that represented 2 years of love and 6 months of saving. The picture was beautiful, artistic even. It showed exactly what Sarah could have had if she'd been the person I thought she was. But the real masterpiece was the note I wrote to go with it. I must have written and rewritten that note a dozen times. It had to be perfect, not angry or bitter, but cold and final. It had to make her understand that I knew everything and that there was no going back. The final version was simple. "Sarah, I saw you get Marco's number at the restaurant. I also saw all the messages on your phone, Jake, David, and all the others. I especially enjoyed the group chat where you called me predictable and boring while planning to use me for a niece ring. Congratulations, you're free to upgrade now. I hope it was worth it. Don't contact me again. P.S. Guess you found someone more attractive than your insecure boyfriend." That last line was her own words thrown back at her. I wanted her to remember exactly what she'd said to me when I'd confronted her about her behavior. The next day, while Sarah was at work, or at least, where she'd told me she was going, the movers came and packed up everything. I kept only what was mine and left everything of hers exactly where it was. Her clothes, her toiletries, her books, everything stayed behind like a ghost of our relationship. When they were done, my apartment looked completely different. All the furniture was gone, all the pictures were gone, all the little touches that had made it feel like home were gone. It was just empty space, waiting for the next chapter of my life to begin. I placed the note and the photograph on the kitchen counter, right where she always left her phone to charge. Then I took one last look around the place where we'd built what I thought was our life together, and I walked out the door. I'd arranged to stay with my buddy Marcus for a few days while I figured out my next move. Marcus had never liked Sarah much, he'd always said there was something about her that didn't sit right with him. When I explained what had happened, he just shook his head. "I hate to say I told you so, man, but..." "You told me so," I finished. "I should have listened." "Where are you thinking of going?" he asked. "I'd been thinking about that a lot. You know what? I think it's time for a fresh start. Maybe Denver, maybe Portland. Somewhere completely new where I can figure out who I am without her." That evening, I turned off my phone and went to bed early. I knew Sarah would be getting home soon, and I wanted to be unreachable when she found my surprise. But curiosity got the better of me. Around midnight, I turned my phone back on to see what had happened. 67 missed calls. 43 text messages. 12 voicemails. Have you ever seen someone's entire world collapse in real time through text messages? Because that's exactly what I was witnessing. The first few messages were confused. Where are you? Why is all your stuff gone? Is this some kind of joke? Call me back right now. I found your note. This isn't funny. Call me. Then came the anger. You're being ridiculous. So I flirted a little bit, big deal. That doesn't mean anything. I can't believe you're throwing away 2 years over nothing. You're pathetic for going through my phone. That's a violation of privacy. But as the hours passed and I didn't respond, the tone shifted. Please call me back. We can work this out. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. I love you. I was just having fun. It didn't mean anything. You're the one I want to be with. The voicemails were even worse. I could hear her crying, pleading, trying to convince me that everything I'd seen and read was somehow not what it seemed. I was just joking around with those guys, she sobbed in one message. It was harmless flirting. I never actually did anything with them. Please come back, I love you. But here's the thing, I had the screenshots. I had the evidence. I knew exactly what she'd been doing, and more importantly, I knew exactly what she really thought of me. The messages continued for 3 days. They went through every stage of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression. She promised to change, to be better, to never talk to another guy again. She said she'd been stupid, that she'd made a mistake, that she'd do anything to get me back. But the one that really got to me was the message she sent on the 3rd day. I saw the engagement ring in the picture. You were going to propose to me, weren't you? I ruined everything. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Please give me another chance. I'll be the woman you deserve, I promise. And you know what? For just a moment, I almost wavered. Almost. Because despite everything, I had loved her. I had planned to spend my life with her. And hearing her cry and beg and plead made part of me want to forgive her. But then I remembered the group chat messages. I remembered her calling me boring and predictable. I remembered her planning to use me for a ring before she upgraded. I remembered the way she'd looked at me when she called me insecure and unattractive. Some things can't be forgiven. Some betrayals run too deep to heal. On the 4th day, I finally responded. Just one message. I hope Marco was worth it. Then I blocked her number. I found out later from Marcus, who heard it from his girlfriend, who heard it from one of Sarah's friends, that she'd completely fallen apart after I left. She'd called in sick to work for a week, spent her days crying and trying to figure out how to get me back. She'd even gone to Romano's to try to find Marco, thinking maybe she could convince him to help her get in touch with me. Turns out Marco had a girlfriend and had only been polite to Sarah because it was his job. He'd thrown away the napkin with her number on it as soon as she left the restaurant. When she showed up at his work begging him to help her, he'd had to ask the manager to escort her out. The final twist came about a month later. I was settling into my new apartment in Denver, starting my new job, building my new life, when I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hello? Is this about Sarah Peterson? The voice was unfamiliar, professional. Who is this? My name is Detective Rodriguez with the Denver Police Department. We're investigating a stalking case, and your name came up as someone who might have information. My blood ran cold. What kind of stalking case? Ms. Peterson has been harassing several individuals, including attempting to contact you through various means after you've made it clear you don't want contact. She's also been bothering your former coworkers, your friends, and even your family members, trying to get information about your whereabouts. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Are you serious? Very serious. She's violated a restraining order that one of the other victims obtained. We'd like to ask you a few questions about your relationship with her and any unwanted contact you've had since you ended things. That's when I learned the full scope of what Sarah had become after I left. She'd not only been trying to track me down, but she'd also been harassing Jake, David, and the other guys she'd been messaging. When they'd all realized what she was really like and cut contact, she'd started stalking them too. She'd created fake social media accounts to spy on all of us, had been showing up at people's workplaces, and had even hired a private investigator to try to find my new address. The Pi had been the one to tip off the police when he realized what she was really asking him to do. The thing is, Detective Rodriguez explained, we've been building a case against her for a while now. Your testimony about her behavior during your relationship would be very helpful in establishing a pattern. I ended up having to testify in court about what Sarah had done to me. Sitting in that courtroom, looking at her for the first time since I'd left, was surreal. She looked terrible, thin, hollow-eyed, like she hadn't slept in months. When she saw me, she started crying and tried to get up from her chair, but her lawyer pulled her back down. The judge was not sympathetic to her tears. When all the evidence was presented, the harassment, the stalking, the violation of restraining orders, Sarah was sentenced to 6 months in jail and 2 years of probation. She was also ordered to have no contact with any of her victims, including me. But here's the really crazy part: as they were leading her away in handcuffs, she looked right at me and mouthed the words, "I love you." Even then, even after everything she'd done, she still didn't understand that what she'd felt for me wasn't love. It was possession. It was control. It was the desperate need to win a game that she'd already lost the moment she decided to betray me. Love doesn't lie. Love doesn't cheat. Love doesn't call you insecure and unattractive for having reasonable boundaries. Love doesn't use you for financial gain while planning to upgrade to someone better. What Sarah felt for me was never love. It was convenience, and when that convenience was taken away, she couldn't handle it. As for me, I'm doing great. Better than great, actually. That fresh start in Denver turned out to be exactly what I needed. I've got a new job that I love, new friends who actually respect me, and I'm even dating someone new, a woman named Emma who thinks my boring preferences for staying in and watching movies are perfect for cozy nights together. Emma knows the whole story about Sarah, and instead of thinking I'm insecure or unattractive, she thinks I'm incredibly strong for walking away from someone who didn't deserve me. She's never given me a reason to doubt her loyalty, and she's never made me feel like I'm not enough. The engagement ring? I eventually sold it and used the money to put a down payment on a house here in Denver. Every time I walk through my front door, I'm reminded that I made the right choice. I'm reminded that I'm worth more than being someone's backup plan. And Sarah? Last I heard, she was still in therapy, still trying to convince people that she was the victim in all of this. She tells anyone who'll listen that I abandoned her over innocent flirting, that I overreacted to her being friendly. But the truth is, I didn't abandon her. I simply stopped allowing her to take advantage of me. I stopped accepting being treated like I was lucky to be with her instead of the other way around. The best revenge isn't always about hurting someone back. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply refusing to let them hurt you anymore. It's walking away with your dignity intact and building something better without them. Would I do anything differently if I could go back? Maybe I would have confronted her sooner, maybe I would have paid more attention to the red flags that I now realize were there all along. But I don't regret leaving. I don't regret the way I left. And I definitely don't regret refusing to take her back when she finally realized what she'd lost. Because here's what I learned from that whole experience: you can't love someone into being a better person. You can't fix someone who doesn't think they're broken. And you definitely can't build a future with someone who sees you as temporary. Sarah thought she was playing a game where she held all the cards. She thought she could treat me however she wanted because I'd always be there, always be the safe option, always be the backup plan. But she forgot one very important thing: even the most patient person has a breaking point. And when you push someone past that point, when you make them realize that you never valued them the way they valued you, there's no going back. The woman who rolled her eyes at me and called me insecure and unattractive got exactly what she deserved: a life without the man who would have given her everything. And me? I got something even better. I got my self-respect back. I got a life without someone who didn't deserve me. I got the chance to find someone who actually loves me for who I am, not for what I can provide. So the next time someone tries to tell you that you're being insecure or unattractive for having standards, remember my story. Remember that you deserve someone who chooses you every single day, not someone who keeps you around until something better comes along. Because trust me, there is nothing more attractive than knowing your own worth and refusing to settle for less. And Sarah? If you're somehow reading this, I hope you've learned that actions have consequences, that people aren't possessions, and that love isn't a game to be won or lost. But mostly, I hope you've learned that when you call someone insecure and unattractive for loving you, you might just discover that they're secure enough to walk away and attractive enough to find someone who appreciates them. Thanks for setting me free, Sarah. Best thing you ever did for me. Now if you'll excuse me, I have a beautiful life to get back to, one that doesn't include you. The aftermath of Sarah's court case was when things got really interesting. See, I thought that would be the end of it. She'd serve her time, I'd move on with my life, and we'd both learn our lessons. But Sarah had other plans. About 3 months after her sentencing, I started getting strange messages from people I'd never heard of before. Social media friend requests from obviously fake accounts, emails from addresses that made no sense, even a few phone calls where the person would hang up as soon as I answered. At first, I thought it was just random spam, but then Emma pointed out a pattern I'd missed. "Look at the timing," she said, showing me screenshots on her phone. All of these started exactly 3 days after Sarah was released from jail. She was right. Sarah had only served 4 months of her 6-month sentence due to good behavior, and apparently, she'd spent her time in jail planning her next move. The fake accounts were sophisticated, they used stock photos and had months of fabricated post history. But they all followed the same pattern: they'd send me friend requests, and when I didn't accept, they'd try to message me through different platforms. The emails were more direct. They came from addresses like "Sarah is innocent 2025 and you ruined my life," and contained long, rambling messages about how I'd destroyed her life over nothing and how I owed her an explanation. But the phone calls were the creepiest part. They always came at the same time, 3:17 a.m., exactly 2 years to the minute from when we'd first said I love you to each other. When I finally answered one, thinking maybe it was an emergency, I heard Sarah's voice. "Do you remember what you said to me at 3:17 a.m. on March 15, 2023? She whispered. I hung up immediately and blocked the number, but she just called from a different one the next night. Same time, same question. This went on for 2 weeks before I finally called Detective Rodriguez. "She's violating her probation," he told me. "But we need more evidence. Can you start recording these calls?" So I did. I documented everything, the fake accounts, the emails, the phone calls. I even hired a tech-savvy friend to help me trace some of the accounts back to their source. Sure enough, they all led back to Sarah. But here's where the story takes a turn that even I didn't see coming. One night, about a month into Sarah's post-jail harassment campaign, I was working late at my home office when I heard a noise outside. It was subtle, just a soft scraping sound, like someone dragging something across pavement. I looked out my window and saw a figure in dark clothing standing under the streetlight across from my house. They were too far away to make out clearly, but something about their posture seemed familiar. I grabbed my phone and called the police, but by the time they arrived, the person was gone. The officer took a report, but without more evidence, there wasn't much they could do. The next night, same thing. Figure under the streetlight, gone by the time police arrived. On the third night, I was ready. I'd borrowed a high-definition camera from Emma's photography studio and set it up in my window. When the figure appeared, I started recording. The zoom function on that camera was incredible. I could see every detail of the person standing under that light, and my blood ran cold when I realized who it was. Sarah. But not the Sarah I remembered. This Sarah was gaunt, hollow-eyed, wearing clothes that hung loose on her frame. She was holding something in her hands, a small object that she kept turning over and over. I watched her for almost an hour. She never moved from under that light, never looked directly at my house, just stood there turning that object over in her hands. When she finally left, she placed whatever she'd been holding on the ground under the streetlight and walked away. I waited until morning to go check what she'd left. It was a small jewelry box, the kind that might hold an engagement ring. Inside was a note written in Sarah's handwriting. "This should have been mine. You promised me forever, and I'm going to make sure you keep that promise." That's when I knew this had moved beyond harassment into something much more dangerous. Detective Rodriguez took the threat seriously. They increased patrols around my neighborhood, and I was assigned a victim advocate who helped me understand the legal process and my options. "People like Sarah don't usually stop on their own," the advocate, Maria, explained. "The obsession becomes their entire identity. In her mind, you're not a person with your own right to choose, you're a possession that was stolen from her." "But it's been over a year," I said. "How can she still be this fixated?" Maria's expression was grim. "Time doesn't heal this kind of obsession. If anything, it makes it worse. Every day that passes without getting what she wants makes the need stronger." She was right. Sarah's behavior escalated dramatically over the next few weeks. She started showing up at my workplace, following me to the grocery store, even somehow finding out where Emma lived and beginning to stalk her too. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in late October. Emma and I were having dinner at a restaurant downtown, our 6-month anniversary, actually, when I noticed a familiar figure sitting alone at the bar. Sarah had lost even more weight since the night I'd seen her under the streetlight. Her hair was stringy and unwashed, her clothes were wrinkled, and she had this wild look in her eyes that made my stomach clench with fear. "We need to leave," I told Emma quietly. "Now." Emma started to ask why, but then she followed my gaze and saw Sarah staring at us with an intensity that was genuinely frightening. We tried to leave discreetly, but Sarah saw us getting up and immediately stood from her barstool. As we headed for the exit, she called out across the restaurant, "Running away again? That's all you ever do, run away from your problems." The entire restaurant turned to look at us. I grabbed Emma's hand and we hurried outside, but Sarah was right behind us. "You can't just pretend I don't exist," she screamed as we got to my car. "I loved you. I gave you everything. You cheated on me." I finally yelled back, my composure completely shattered. "You lied to me, you used me, and you called me insecure and unattractive when I caught you." That seemed to stop her for a moment. She stood there in the parking lot, tears streaming down her face, looking like a ghost of the woman I'd once known. "I made a mistake," she whispered. "People make mistakes. Why can't you forgive me?" And you know what? In that moment, I actually felt sorry for her. This broken, desperate woman standing in a parking lot in the cold, begging for forgiveness for something unforgivable, it was almost tragic. But then I remembered the stalking, the harassment, the threats. I remembered the way she'd treated me during our relationship, The way she'd talked about me to her friends, the way she'd planned to use me for a ring before upgrading. "Sarah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "you need help. Professional help. This isn't love, this is obsession, and it's not healthy for either of us." Her face changed in an instant. The tears stopped, and that wild look came back into her eyes. "Don't you dare try to psychoanalyze me," she hissed. "I'm not crazy. I'm fighting for what's mine." "I was never yours," I said firmly. "I was with you, but I was never your possession. And after what you did, I never will be again." That's when she completely snapped. Sarah lunged at me, screaming something incoherent about how I belonged to her and how she'd never let me go. Emma screamed and jumped back, and I had to grab Sarah's wrist to stop her from clawing at my face. "Call 911, I shouted to Emma while trying to restrain Sarah, who was now sobbing and thrashing like a wild animal. The police arrived within minutes, and it took 3 officers to get Sarah under control. As they were putting her in handcuffs, she looked at me with such pure hatred that it made my skin crawl. "This isn't over," she said through gritted teeth. "It will never be over. You're mine, and if I can't have you, no one can." Those words echoed in my head for weeks afterward. Even after Sarah was back in jail, this time for violating her probation, stalking, and assault, I couldn't shake the feeling that she meant what she'd said. The trial for the new charges was a media circus. Somehow, local news had gotten hold of the story, and it became this sensational tale of obsession and revenge. The headlines were brutal. Woman sentenced for stalking ex-boyfriend after cheating scandal, love gone wrong. The engagement ring that started it all, when just being friendly becomes fatal attraction. I hated the attention, but Emma convinced me that the publicity might actually help other people recognize the signs of this kind of obsessive behavior. "Your story could save someone else from going through what we've been through," she said, and she was right. During the trial, more details about Sarah's behavior came out. The prosecution had done a thorough investigation and discovered that her pattern of manipulation and obsession went back years, even before our relationship. Her college boyfriend had filed a restraining order against her after they broke up. She'd stalked him for months, sent him threatening messages, and even keyed his car. The case had been sealed because they were both minors at the time, but it established a clear pattern of behavior. There was also testimony from her coworkers about her increasingly erratic behavior after I'd left. She'd been fired from her job for using company resources to try to track me down, and she'd been evicted from her apartment for disturbing other tenants with her late-night screaming fits. But the most damning evidence came from Sarah's own journal, which police had found during a search of her temporary living situation. Page after page of obsessive entries about me, about our relationship, about her plans to win me back by any means necessary. Some of the entries were so disturbing that the judge had them read in closed session. From what I was told later, they contained detailed plans for kidnapping, threats against Emma, and even references to a Romeo and Juliet scenario where we'd be together forever. The psychiatrist who evaluated Sarah diagnosed her with several conditions: obsessive-compulsive disorder, borderline personality disorder, and something called erotomania, which is basically a delusional belief that someone is in love with you even when they're not. The defendant has constructed an elaborate fantasy where the victim is actually in love with her and is being prevented from expressing that love by outside forces, the psychiatrist explained to the court. In her mind, his rejection isn't real, it's something that's been forced upon him, and if she can just eliminate the obstacles, he'll return to her. That explains so much about Sarah's behavior. She genuinely believed that I still loved her, that I was only staying away because of Emma, or because of social pressure, or because I was confused. She couldn't accept that I had simply chosen to leave her because of her actions. The judge sentenced Sarah to 5 years in prison, followed by 10 years of probation with strict no-contact orders. She was also required to undergo psychological treatment and take medication for her conditions. As they led her away, she looked back at me one last time. But instead of the hatred I'd seen before, her expression was almost peaceful. "I'll wait for you," she said calmly. "I'll wait as long as it takes." Those words gave me chills, but I tried to put them out of my mind. 5 years was a long time. Maybe she'd get the help she needed and finally move on with her life. But you know what they say about the best laid plans, right? About 6 months after Sarah's sentencing, I got a call from Detective Rodriguez with news that made my blood run cold. "She's been writing letters," he said without preamble. "Hundreds of them. To you, to Emma, to your family members, to your friends. The prison has been intercepting them, but I thought you should know what we're dealing with." "What kind of letters?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "Love letters, mostly. But also detailed plans for when she gets out. She's been keeping track of everything: your new address, your work schedule, Emma's photography studio. She's somehow getting information from the outside." My heart sank. How is that possible? Isn't she supposed to be cut off from all that? Prison isn't as secure as people think. Inmates have ways of getting information, especially if they're determined enough. And Sarah is very determined. The detective sent me copies of some of the letters, and reading them was like stepping into the mind of someone completely divorced from reality. Sarah wrote about our future together, about the house we'd buy, about the children we'd have. She wrote about how she'd changed, how she'd learned from her mistakes, how she was becoming the woman I'd always wanted her to be. But mixed in with the love letters were detailed surveillance reports. She somehow knew that Emma and I had gotten engaged, that we were planning a wedding for the following summer, that I'd been promoted at work. She knew Emma's daily schedule, the route I took to work, even what grocery store we shopped at. She's getting help from someone on the outside, Detective Rodriguez explained. We're investigating, but it's not easy to track down. Could be another inmate's friend or family member, could be someone she hired before she went to prison. We're working on it. In the meantime, he recommended that Emma and I take precautions. We changed our daily routines, installed security systems at both our homes, and I started carrying pepper spray. Emma temporarily closed her photography studio and started working from home. The investigation into Sarah's information source took months, but they eventually found the connection. It was David, the coworker she'd been having an affair with during our relationship. Apparently, he'd been visiting her in prison, and she'd convinced him that I was somehow keeping her from her true love. David had been feeding her information about my life, taking photos of me and Emma, even following us to gather intel about our daily routines. When police arrested him, they found a detailed dossier on both of us that was honestly terrifying in its thoroughness. But here's where the story takes another twist that nobody saw coming. David's arrest made the news, and that's when other pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. Remember Jake, the guy from Sarah's gym who she'd been messaging? He came forward with his own story. Turns out, Sarah had been manipulating him too. She'd convinced him that I was abusive, that I'd threatened her, that she needed protection. Jake had been sending her money for months, thinking he was helping a victim of domestic violence. Then Marco, the waiter from Romano's, contacted the police with his own shocking revelation. Sarah had been calling his workplace repeatedly, trying to get him to corroborate her story that I'd been jealous and controlling. When he refused, she'd started harassing his girlfriend, claiming that he'd been having an affair with her. The web of lies and manipulation that Sarah had constructed was staggering. She'd convinced multiple people that I was the villain in our story, that she was the victim, that she needed their help to escape from me. Some of them had been giving her money, others had been providing information, and a few had even been planning to help her when she got out of prison. But the most shocking revelation came from Sarah's cellmate, a woman named Tracy who'd been released and decided to come forward with information. She's been planning something big, Tracy told the police. She talks about it all the time, how she's going to make everything right when she gets out. She's got this whole scenario worked out where she proves to everyone that you really love her. Tracy's testimony revealed that Sarah had been using her time in prison to plan what she called the grand gesture. She'd been studying psychology books, learning about Stockholm Syndrome and trauma bonding, convinced that if she could just create the right circumstances, she could make me fall in love with her again. The plan was elaborate and terrifying. Sarah intended to stage a situation where she would rescue me from some kind of danger, proving her devotion and making me grateful enough to give her another chance. She'd been working out every detail, how to create the danger, how to appear at just the right moment, how to make it look like coincidence rather than orchestration. But the most chilling part was her backup plan. If the rescue scenario didn't work, if I still refused to take her back, she'd already decided that we would die together. In her twisted mind, death was preferable to a life without me. She's got it all planned out, Tracy explained. She calls it the Romeo and Juliet ending. She thinks if she can't have you in life, she'll have you in death, and then everyone will understand that it was true love. The authorities took this threat seriously. Sarah's release date was still 3 years away, but they began preparing for it immediately. They developed a comprehensive safety plan for Emma and me, including potential relocation if necessary. But you know what the craziest part of all this was? Despite everything Sarah had done, despite the stalking and the threats and the elaborate schemes, part of me still felt sorry for her. I know that probably sounds insane, but hear me out. This woman had completely destroyed her life because she couldn't accept that I didn't want to be with her. She'd lost her job, her home, her freedom, and her sanity, all because she'd cheated on me and I'd had the audacity to leave her for it. In some twisted way, I felt responsible for what she'd become. Not for her actions, those were entirely her choice, but for the pain that had driven her to such extremes. If I'd handled things differently, if I'd confronted her directly instead of just disappearing, maybe she wouldn't have spiraled so completely out of control. Emma disagreed with me when I shared these thoughts with her. You're not responsible for Sarah's mental illness, she said firmly. You're not responsible for her inability to handle rejection. You're not responsible for her choice to stalk and harass us instead of getting help. You did nothing wrong by leaving someone who betrayed you. She was right, of course. But that didn't make the guilt any easier to bear. The guilt got worse when I learned about Sarah's family situation. Her parents had cut off contact with her after her first arrest, unable to deal with the shame and stress of her behavior. Her sister had moved across the country and changed her name to avoid association with Sarah's crimes. She was completely alone in the world, with no support system and no one to help her get better. I started thinking about visiting her in prison, maybe trying to get her to understand that her obsession was hurting both of us. Emma was horrified by the idea. "Absolutely not," she said. "That's exactly what she wants, contact with you, attention from you, proof that you still care enough to come see her. It would make everything worse." The victim advocate agreed with Emma. "Any contact from you would be interpreted as encouragement," Maria explained. "In Sarah's mind, if you cared enough to visit, that means you still have feelings for her. It would validate her belief that you're just being kept apart by circumstances." So I stayed away. But I couldn't stop thinking about her, sitting in that prison cell, constructing elaborate fantasies about our future together. I couldn't stop wondering if there was something I could have done differently, some way I could have prevented this whole situation. Then, about a year before Sarah's scheduled release, I got news that changed everything. Sarah had been found unconscious in her cell, the victim of what appeared to be a suicide attempt. She'd overdosed on medication that she'd been stockpiling for weeks, and by the time the guards found her, she was barely breathing. They managed to save her life, but the attempt had caused significant brain damage. The Sarah who woke up in the hospital was not the same person who'd gone to sleep in her cell. The doctors explained that the lack of oxygen had affected her memory and cognitive function. She remembered fragments of her life, childhood memories, pieces of our relationship, bits and pieces of her time in prison, but she couldn't piece them together into a coherent narrative. More importantly, she no longer seemed to understand why she was in prison or what she'd done to get there. When they told her about the stalking and harassment, she looked confused and said she couldn't remember any of it. "It's like her obsession has been erased," the prison psychologist explained to me during a phone call. "She knows she was in a relationship with you, but she can't remember the details. She doesn't remember cheating, doesn't remember your breakup, doesn't remember the aftermath. To her, it's like you just disappeared from her life one day for no reason." This created a complicated situation. Sarah was no longer a threat, her damaged brain couldn't sustain the kind of complex planning and obsession that had made her so dangerous. But she was also no longer competent to stand trial for any future crimes, and she couldn't be held responsible for her past actions in the same way. The state had to decide whether to release her into a care facility or keep her in prison for the remainder of her sentence. After extensive evaluation, they decided that she posed no danger to society and transferred her to a long-term care facility for people with brain injuries. I visited her there once, about 6 months after her transfer. I know Emma thought it was a bad idea, and maybe it was, but I needed to see for myself what had become of the woman who'd once turned my world upside down. The Sarah I found was like a shadow of her former self. She was sitting in a wheelchair by the window, staring out at the garden with a blank expression. When I said her name, she turned to look at me with no recognition in her eyes. "Do I know you?" she asked politely. "We used to know each other," I said carefully. "A long time ago." She studied my face for a moment, then smiled. "You seem nice. Are you here to visit someone?" "I'm here to visit you, Sarah." She looked confused. "But I don't remember you. Are you sure you have the right person?" I stayed for about an hour, talking with her about nothing in particular. She told me about the birds she liked to watch in the garden, about the nurses who were kind to her, about the puzzle she was working on. She seemed peaceful, content even, in a way that the Sarah I'd known never had been. When I got up to leave, she grabbed my hand gently. "Thank you for visiting," she said. "Even though I don't remember you, it was nice to have someone to talk to. Will you come back sometime?" I promised I would, though I wasn't sure if I meant it. Driving home from that visit, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that the threat was over, sadness for what Sarah had become, and a weird kind of closure that I hadn't expected to find. The woman who'd cheated on me, who'd called me insecure and unattractive, who'd stalked me and threatened me and made my life hell for years, that woman was gone. In her place was someone who seemed genuinely kind, someone who couldn't hurt a fly even if she wanted to. But was it justice? Was this what she deserved for what she'd done to me, to Emma, to all the people she'd manipulated and hurt? Or was it just a tragedy that happened to solve my problem? I still don't know the answer to that question. What I do know is that Emma and I got married 6 months later in a small ceremony surrounded by people who actually love and support us. We didn't have to worry about Sarah showing up, didn't have to have security guards, didn't have to look over our shoulders. For the first time in years, we were truly free. We've been married for 2 years now, and life has been everything I hoped it would be when I first thought about proposing. Emma is my partner in every sense of the word. She supports my dreams, challenges me to be better, and never makes me feel like I'm not enough. We've talked about having children, about buying a bigger house, about growing old together. All the things I once thought I wanted with Sarah, I now have with someone who actually deserves them. And Sarah? I kept my promise to visit her. I go about once a month, usually bringing books or puzzles or just sitting with her in the garden. She never remembers me from one visit to the next, but she's always happy to see me. Sometimes she tells me about dreams she has, fragments of memories that don't quite fit together, glimpses of a life she can't quite recall. Once, she told me about a dream where she was getting married to someone she loved very much, but she couldn't remember his face. Another time, she dreamed about a restaurant with candles and a man who gave her flowers. She always seems sad after these dreams, like she's mourning something she can't name. I never tell her who I am or why I'm visiting. The doctors say it would be cruel to burden her with memories of actions she can't remember taking or consequences she can't understand. Better to let her live in peace with the fragments she has left. But sometimes, when I'm sitting with her in that garden, I wonder if there's still some part of the old Sarah buried deep inside that broken mind. Some part that remembers what she did and why she's where she is. Some part that's finally at peace because the obsession that consumed her has been burned away. I guess I'll never know for sure. What I do know is that my story has a happy ending, even if Sarah's doesn't. I found someone who loves me for who I am, not for what I can provide. I learned to value myself enough to walk away from someone who didn't deserve me. And I discovered that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well without the person who tried to destroy you. The engagement ring I was going to give Sarah? I ended up using the money from selling it to buy Emma's ring instead. It's a completely different style. Sarah had always wanted something huge and flashy, but Emma preferred something simple and elegant. The difference between them summed up in jewelry, you might say. Emma's ring represents everything good about love, trust, respect, partnership, and genuine affection. Sarah's ring represented something much darker, possession, control, and the idea that love is something that can be bought or earned through manipulation. I'm grateful every day that I found out who Sarah really was before I married her. I'm grateful that her betrayal revealed her true character before I was legally bound to her. I'm grateful that I had the strength to walk away and the courage to start over. And in a weird way, I'm even grateful to Sarah herself. Not for what she did to me, but for what she taught me about myself. She showed me that I was stronger than I thought, that I deserved better than I was settling for, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive behavior. The woman who rolled her eyes at me and called me insecure and unattractive for having reasonable boundaries taught me that I was actually secure enough to have those boundaries and attractive enough to find someone who respects them. So thank you, Sarah, wherever you are in that damaged mind of yours. Thank you for showing me what I didn't want in a partner. Thank you for freeing me to find what I did want. And thank you for teaching me that sometimes the best revenge is simply being happy without the person who tried to make you miserable. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a beautiful wife to get home to, and a life to live that has nothing to do with the woman who thought she could play games with my heart. The game is over, Sarah. And I won.